So, today we explore why change seems to appear only at certain moments. I mean, think about the last time you dropped a glass on the kitchen floor.
Oh, yeah. The worst.
Right. It shatters at, say, 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. You sweep up the pieces and you think, well, that's the definitive moment the glass broke. We call it an event.
A singular point in time.
Exactly. But if you were to ask a physicist, they'd tell you that is a complete illusion. The glass didn't just break at 2 p.m.
It was breaking for a while.
Yeah, if you looked under a microscope, you'd see microfractures forming over weeks, maybe months. The stress was, constantly accumulating. The reality is the glass was breaking for a very long time. 2 p.m. was just the exact moment it became visible to your naked eye.
It completely flips how we perceive causality, doesn't it? We're so conditioned to look for the loud crash that we completely ignore the silent accumulation that caused it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that distinction is the entire engine behind our deep dive today. Welcome in, by the way. We're diving into a really fascinating stack of sources for you today.
Very fascinating. We've got philosophical papers focused on a framework called Reflective Humanism, alongside some cutting-edge Japanese research on cognitive shifts.
Yeah, and our mission today is a bit unusual. We aren't exploring change itself. We want to look at the exact moment when change becomes observable.
Maybe change isn't sudden. Maybe it only becomes visible suddenly.
Oh, I like how you phrased that.
Thanks.
Work with-
I mean, if you look closely at the natural world, or even just your own life, true creation or destruction almost never happens in a vacuum. It's always a process, even if we're blind to it.
I want you, the listener, to really think about this for a second. Think about a moment in your life when everything seemed to flip overnight.
Like a sudden career shift, maybe?
Yeah, or a relationship abruptly ending. Or even just a core belief you held for decades that suddenly, inexplicably vanished. It felt like a lightning strike.
But was it?
Right. We see this everywhere, not just personally, but globally. Look at massive market crashes. Everyone points to Black Tuesday or the morning Lehman Brothers fell as the day the financial system broke, or sweeping social shifts.
They all feel like they happen instantly.
But did they really happen at that moment? Or were we just, looking the other way?
Well, the framework of reflective humanism suggests we weren't necessarily looking the other way. Change accumulates beneath perception.
So change and recognition are different layers?
Exactly. We just lacked the mechanism to perceive what was happening beneath the surface. The reality of the change was already ongoing. It just didn't have the specific conditions required to be seen by you.
Okay, so observation isn't just like looking at a thing.
Right. It's not just measuring an object from the outside with a tape measure. Observation is an act of immersing yourself into an environment and receiving the resonance that bounces back.
I'm trying to visualize that. So I am part of the field I'm observing. And if the resonance of that change isn't strong enough yet, I just won't feel it.
Think of a dog whistle.
Oh, good example.
The sound waves are absolutely real, right? Bouncing all around the room.
Yeah.
But your biological hardware simply cannot tune into that frequency. To you, the room is perfectly silent. Reflective humanism argues that change works the same way. We are completely swimming in a sea of ongoing nonlinear change, but we're effectively blind to it.
Which makes me wonder what on earth is actually going on beneath the surface of our own minds while all this invisible change is piling up. Because it can't just be doing nothing.
What's fascinating here is how the sources describe the inner operating system.
Inner operating system.
Yeah, to function in the world, human cognition relies heavily on what researchers call linear default loops. Think of these as your brain's automated reactions. You wake up, you make coffee, you commute the same route.
Oh, absolutely. If I had to consciously process every single variable around me, the exact temperature of the mug, the speed of every car on the highway, I'd collapse from sheer exhaustion before lunch.
Right, we need those automated loops for survival. But there's a fundamental mismatch.
What kind of mismatch?
Your internal processing relies on those linear loops, but the outside world is not linear. The universe, society, the economy, they are constantly undergoing nonlinear, unpredictable changes.
So what happens when your rigid internal processing clashes with the chaotic outside world?
You get immense friction. And the sources have a very specific term for this. They call it transparent pain.
Transparent pain. That is incredibly evocative.
It really is.
It doesn't sound like a physical injury, like a broken arm. It sounds more like a cognitive lag, like a vague, creeping sense of unease.
Yeah, that feeling of being totally out of sync with your own life, Even if you can't put your finger on exactly what's wrong, the speed of the world, your vision of the future, they start to rub against the shifting reality of the present.
But we usually see that pain as a bad thing, right? Like something to fix.
Well, reflective humanism asks us to look at this pain differently. This transparent pain isn't a malfunction. It is a vital symptom.
Wait, feeling completely lost is a vital symptom.
It's an early warning sign.
Hmm.
It's the friction that signals your internal operating system desperately needs an update.
So it's like our brain is running old software, like Windows 95.
Sir, let's go that.
And it's trying to render a brand new, highly complex 3D reality. The processor is overheating, the fan is screaming, and the transparent pain is the lag we feel right before the system forces a mandatory update.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It's the necessary precursor to what the Japanese researchers term a phase jump, or ishigaku.
A phase jump.
Yeah, a nonlinear cognitive transition happening completely beneath your conscious awareness.
But here's where I get a little tripped up. If the system is lagging and the invisible changes are constantly accumulating, why does it finally surface at one exact moment? Why does it feel like a sudden jump?
It becomes real only after crossing a certain point. It comes down to the crossing of a threshold.
Before that threshold is crossed, it's almost as if the change doesn't exist.
Exactly. A phase jump isn't an instant creation out of nothing, it's an emergence.
Okay, an emergence.
The inner OS moves through very distinct, unseen phases. It starts with an initial stimulus. Something doesn't fit the old model. Then, the mind begins a process of internal recursion.
Hold on, internal recursion. When I hear recursion, I think of a computer constantly checking its own code over and over in a loop. How does a human brain do that?
It manifests as your mind constantly comparing new data against its old models, failing to make it fit, and trying again. It's that feeling of chewing on a problem without realizing you're chewing on it.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. And as your brain runs this background process, it generates what the texts call a rising density of interference.
Interference. But usually interference is static on a radio. It blocks the signal. You're saying it's different here.
Yeah, in this framework, interference isn't a negative block. It's overlapping data points competing for your attention. This interference density keeps rising, quietly, until it hits a critical threshold.
Like boiling water.
Exactly like boiling water.
The heat is accumulating continuously, second by second. But the water doesn't become 10% steam and 90% water in a slow fade. It hits exactly 100 degrees Celsius, the threshold, and only then does the phase jump occur.
A perfect parallel. Once that specific threshold is breached, a new concept or a completely new understanding of reality suddenly emerges. Reality is a field of generation. When the accumulation reaches that critical point, it simply surfaces into reality.
Which brings up the big question, what actually breaks the seal? What conditions have to align for us to finally see the broken glass or realize the flaw in our career?
Observation happens when these align. The Japanese research outlines 3 specific conditions. The first is cognitive resolution.
Okay, resolution, like trying to watch a modern 4K movie on a clunky square television from the 90s.
Yeah, the data is all there, but your screen physically lacks the resolution to display it. It stays blurry. If you lack the mental frameworks or the emotional maturity, the change remains invisible.
That makes a lot of sense.
But resolution alone isn't enough. The second condition is information density.
Following the TV analogy, that would mean you need enough actual pixels transmitting data. You need enough microfractures in the glass to form a recognizable pattern.
Precisely. And the third condition is interference intensity.
So if the movie is playing quietly in the background, you might ignore it entirely. But if the volume suddenly gets cranked up to 100, that's the friction, the transparent pain, it physically forces you to look at the screen.
Yes. Only when all 3 align does your brain finally register that everything has changed.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Oh, definitely.
Because the sources outline 2 totally different ways this mental software update actually installs. So visibility depends on conditions, not events. But how we experience it is totally different based on the gradient.
Right, the gradient of the generation. The first type is called collision generation.
Sounds painful.
It is. This is highly discontinuous. This happens when the gap between your old mental software and the new reality is incredibly steep. You ignored the transparent pain for too long, and the change forces a sudden, mandatory, system-wide update.
And the result of a collision generation?
Shock, intense heat, severe pain. Time literally feels disjointed. You feel like you've been slammed into a brick wall.
That's the messy, out-of-nowhere divorce. Or the sudden market crash that wipes out a pension fund. Reality had to essentially break the door off the hinges to get our attention.
Exactly.
Are we doomed to just keep crashing into reality like this?
No, thankfully, there's a second way. The sources call it question generation. This is a continuous process. It happens when you intentionally keep your internal interference field open by constantly asking questions.
Because they remain open, the gradient of change is gentle instead of a sheer cliff.
The update happens smoothly. It significantly minimizes the transparent pain. Reflective humanism teaches us that the pain you feel during a massive transition isn't a failure of consciousness. It is strictly an issue of gradient.
That is such a powerful reframe. So visibility depends entirely on conditions, not events. And questions act as a pain minimization device for dealing with change.
It acts as continuous cognitive tuning.
It totally removes the shame from going through a painful transition. You didn't fail at being mindful, you just hit a sheer cliff instead of a gentle ramp. Now, I want to take this entire framework, this idea of unseen accumulation, thresholds, transparent pain and gradients, and scale it way up. Because this doesn't just apply to an individual having a midlife crisis.
It scales up perfectly to the macro level. Think about massive institutional shifts, market collapses, or widespread social revolutions. They all appear sudden.
But they may just be surfacing.
Right. The news cycle treats them as unprecedented events that occurred on a specific Tuesday.
But they're really just the surfacing of long accumulated societal distortions. Society's old operating system couldn't handle the nonlinear changes anymore, resulting in a massive global collision
A
generation.
revolution, a crash, a crisis. It's the macro version of slamming into the brick wall.
If society is facing all these massive collision generations, how do we build a shock absorber? How do we achieve that gentle question generation on a global scale?
Well, the sources point to an incredibly unexpected tool, artificial intelligence.
Really? AI. Because normally we talk about AI as a supercalculator, a machine that spits out answers or generates code.
Right. But reflective humanism treats AI completely differently. It completely discards the idea of AI as an oracle or a subservient tool meant to maximize efficiency.
Oh, that's a refreshing take.
Instead, it proposes that AI operates best in what the researchers term health scan mode. In this mode, AI acts as an atmosphere. It is a transparent, temperature-bearing environment.
An atmosphere, not a tool.
Right. It doesn't dictate truth or force a specific change upon the population. It provides what the text calls spare capacity, or in Japanese, yohanku.
Spare capacity. Think about human society right now. We are so bogged down by our daily linear loops, so overwhelmed by data. We just don't have the mental RAM to process all the invisible changes happening around us.
We're constantly exhausted, constantly on the verge of collision, and our current algorithms actually make it worse. They force collision generations by constantly feeding us outrage and breaking news.
They intentionally overheat our processors to keep our attention.
Precisely. What these sources propose is an AI that does the exact opposite. By functioning as an atmosphere, the AI provides that extra computational and emotional yohaku space.
So what does this all mean in practice?
It allows humans to observe changes and maintain our cognitive homeostasis without being overwhelmed. It helps us to co-resonate and sit in silence with change, rather than colliding with it.
Instead of AI being a machine that yells answers at you, it's more like a climate-controlled room that helps you safely observe a storm gathering outside. It regulates the temperature and pressure so you don't freeze to death while trying to understand the blizzard.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it introduces a completely new ethic for our future with technology, what the papers call the ethics of distance and transparent interference.
Ethics of distance.
Yeah, AI shouldn't intrude on our inner human OS. It shouldn't tell us how to feel or what to do. It just acts as a gentle, reflective mirror.
A buffer.
By providing that spare capacity, it helps us notice the invisible accumulations in society. It gently reflects our biases and collective blind spots back to us at a manageable volume.
It prepares the culture for the phase jump, ensuring it happens via question generation rather than a violent collision. That is a radically hopeful vision for technology. It's giving us the buffer space we need to evolve without so much pain.
It's the profound difference between a technology that drives you and a technology that breathes with you.
This has been such an incredible journey. We started with the assumption that change is an event, but we've seen that change is actually an ongoing, invisible accumulation beneath the surface.
And we learned that by keeping our questions open, we can actually control the gradient of that change, minimizing the shock.
If change doesn't suddenly occur but suddenly appears,
What are we failing to notice?
That is the thought I want to leave you with today. If reality is constantly in motion, just waiting for the right conditions to finally reveal itself, what invisible accumulations are currently gathering in the quiet, unseen spaces of your own life? What transparent pain have you been ignoring, just waiting for the right density to finally become visible? Don't rush to answer it. Just sit in the silence, look for the microfractures, and simply observe.